Приветствую вас
I
на
welcome all of you here on the second day of International Conference of Democratic Elections in Belarus. I'm Alexander Shlik. I'm representative of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya for elections. I'm glad to welcome you here. We have a couple of dozen of participants here. And can you hear me now? Yes, and we are ready to start today's two expert panels. The first discussion is devoted to the short-term reforms of election process, and the second panel will be on the long-term approaches to the reforms of election process in Belarus. And not to belabor the point, I would like to give the floor to Nana Kalandadze, who will be the moderator of the first expert discussion. Nana, please. Thank you, Alex. I welcome everyone. I will speak in English for a little bit.
And welcome to this session dedicated to discussing considerations for short-term electoral reform in Belarus. Before proceeding, let me quickly give the floor to Nicoletta Diosi, our colleague, who will tell you a bit more about the technical rules for the platform and the meeting.
Thank you, Nana. I have just a couple of technical comments. This workshop or conference is simultaneously interpreted into 3 spoken languages. In order to access those languages, your Zoom app needs to have the newest update. You can access interpretation at the bottom of the Zoom screen when it says interpretation or languages, and please select your channel. I would like to also repeat it for the panelists and all attendees to please select the channel you want to listen in, either to interpretation. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function also at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and you can post your comments or questions there. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicoletta. Let me first start by making a very brief contextual comments and giving it to our excellent speakers. I think very simply said, the audience and the community of friends of democratic elections and generally democratic transformation in Belarus understand and have followed this discussion today quite actively, the discussion that is about how to make sure that when the opportunity is there and when the conditions arise, how to organize the first early democratic snap election in Belarus. The election that should be the core subject of the dialogue and negotiation, something that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and the entire democratic movement of Belarus have been demanding in the past, for the past year or so, together with other core demands. We know that the Constitution of Belarus provides for a very limited period of time in which such an election should be organized. We're talking about 30 to 70 days, and therefore the considerations and the looking for pathways on how to make sure that those are elections organized with the characteristics of free and fair elections can be put in place under the conditions of limited electoral legislation, limited timing, and obviously also a particular and peculiar situation with the parliamentary the parliament legislature that is likely not to be able to commit and implement significant electoral reforms in that situation. So what to do, what steps to take, how to prepare for these elections is the theme that Belarusian democratic movement has been already deliberating, considering. We will today hear from Alexander Shlik, representative of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who leads this exact work in the team, and who has already put forward and publicly discussed a number of proposals. Alex will tell us a bit more about this, but just so the audience understands, the core of the issues are formation of the electoral management bodies at all levels, registration of candidates, access to polls for election observers, and last but not least, the transparent count of the results. We will have 3 other excellent speakers. Alice Silkov from Belarus, a long-standing electoral watchdog, somebody who has been working on and trying to promote democratic transformation of elections in Belarus. Alice will talk about their views and vision for how this reform can take place in the short term. And then we'll also hear from our international guest speakers, Olga Aivazovska from Ukraine, from Opora, as well as Mr. Dr. Yuri Chokan from Moldova. I will tell you a bit more about these individuals before I hand the floor to them. But let's now focus on first these are the core issues and the presentation. Let me remind you that we will be trying to address the 3 key issues. First, what are the general points that should underpin the foundation of these early elections? Secondly, we'll try to enumerate what key priority issues need and deserve attention, and how should they be addressed. And then third, we will address the roles of all the key electoral stakeholders and their responsibility in making that event happen, including, of course, representatives that are in a way incumbent regime at this stage, but may have a certain role in bringing about democratic and free elections in Belarus. On that one last note, let me also say that, of course, together with as the case with yesterday's first opening day of the conference, organizers have invited the representatives of the current government, but we have not received the confirmation of their interest in participating at this panel. With this, Alex, I'll hand the floor to you, and we plan to leave the last 30 minutes of the panel to the discussion, to the questions from our participants from the Zoom call, and we'll hopefully have the interesting debate and discussion. Thank you.
Большое спасибо, Nana.
Thank you very much, Nana, for this start that you've covered the spectrum of issues that we'll be covering today. I will start that, yes, preparing to conduct new democratic elections is one of the main goals that is in front of me as a representative of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. And specifically on this, I will be concentrating my opinion. After that, we'll talk about long-term approach to electoral reform in the next session. But I want to answer the first question: what should be the principles of the new democratic elections? It's the main and the most important question. It's difficult to plan and discuss any kind of technical solutions for holding the elections. I deeply believe that the context that the new elections will be held in will be very important, and we need to take into consideration whether there will be political will to hold a fair and free elections. It was mentioned yesterday during the first day that the good democratic elections need not only the good legal base, but there should be a will to follow the law, and also the political will to hold the human rights, the freedom of expression, the freedom of meeting should make the basis for the democratic elections. And what I want to say that without the political will and without the desire to hold the good elections, so nothing will happen despite our best efforts from a technical point of view. So speaking about the technical solutions, we want to take as a basis that we will, let's take as a presupposition that we want to hold the democratic elections. So we're not speaking about the situation where the elections would be falsified, or the elections will be unfair. So I want to start going to the technical issues on the basis of what we're selecting those technical moments. One moment, please. Ales, I would ask you to switch off your mic because you appear as a speaker right now. So when we started our work on the short-term approach of the electoral reform, we've defined the 4 key topics, taking into consideration the main comments from the international community and observers for the previous elections. We saw that there are 4 main blocks related to human rights, quality of the laws, but it is not those, but specifically thematic things. So first is the formation of the committees. Next is the collection and checking of the signatures. Next, as was the calculation of votes, completely untransparent. And the fourth was the thing that exists during the whole electoral process is access of observers, both local and international. So we'll be speaking about those 4 main topics. I expect that we'll probably have more topics to discuss. I eagerly await the speeches of my colleagues from other countries that which other topics we might discuss. But speaking about those 4 points, first, we approach the short-term reform of electoral process from which kind of position. We won't have time or possibility to change the electoral code when we have the opportunity to hold a new democratic elections. We won't have this opportunity due to 2 factors. We won't have the time, and the second, we won't have the body that can base on trust of people could introduce legislation. The current government, the current parliament does not enjoy the trust of people. They can't introduce good changes into the electoral law. So we start with having the same code that we have, and on the basis on this, we'll try to hold the good, fair democratic elections. And here we approach the formation of committee. The electoral code sets a framework for that, and we want to use this framework. For example, the electoral code says that 1/3 of a committee should be represented by political parties or civil organizations. Our approach is that when the elections will be held the first time after democratic changes, we can base on the citizens, and we will use this approach. And the second thing, we want to create complete transparency for the process of creating the committees, the access of observers and everything during the formation of committees. So I want to stress that I do not like that the local authorities are such involved in the creating of committees, but as we are talking about the short-term elections, so we need to work within the framework of the existing codes. The next thing is the signatures. We're solving the approach. So instead of looking for bad signatures, we'll be looking for good signatures. And this is one of the stipulation in the new approach for the signatures. It's looking for a necessary number of signatures, good signatures to accept the candidate, not looking for a necessary number of signatures to reject the candidate. We're also discussing the problem that in the past, the electorate was prevented from getting information about the candidates, and we want to improve this information that is given to the citizens, even at the point when they're signing for prospective candidates, not the candidates already. The next thing is the transparency of calculation of the votes, and then the correctness of the vote, calculation of the vote. And according to the project that we've developed, it's a project of new results of the calculations by the electoral committee. We can compare it with what we have right now. Everyone who is familiarized with the results, we can see that the number of not used ballots is calculated in the end of the process of calculation, but in fact, it is calculated it should be calculated in the beginning, but it is obviously probably that it is done for the numbers to add up to the necessary amount. So we do not want this approach. We want to have the report that should not just reflect what's happening on the polling place. It should help the electoral committee to fulfill their duties step by step. The next thing that we are doing using the report, and we are introducing checksums. It's a standard practice in many countries, and it is necessary not to find mistakes and punish the electoral committee. It is needed to help the committee to do their work step by step, and so that during the next stages of compiling the results or any complaints, we can see on which step the mistake appeared.
Another important point is that when the vote count is happening, we want everyone to be able to see the result of people expressing the will. It's a standard practice in many countries. I don't think there's anything that shouldn't work here. Somebody may say, but it may take too much time. What? Fine. The electoral commissions work at the precinct, not for their pleasure. They work there so that we as citizens would believe that the election results are fair. Last but not least, is we are tackling two tasks here. One is that we want to guarantee access for the observers to all the stages of the electoral process, including the formation of the electoral commission. Second, we want to outline the rights and access to the information and to documents to all the observers. These drafts were published several months ago, where in the public access, we received a lot of good feedback, including our IFIS International Idea and PA of Council of Europe and our CPA colleagues represent CCs of various countries who informally send their feedback to us. Also, we held consultations with Belarusian civil observers. I'm very grateful to the right of choice team. Alesilkov, who is with us today. Hopefully he will tell us about this. We're not hoping that everything we write is the final result. We're ready for critical feedback, for remarks. We're ready to make amendments. Hopefully in the near future, after this discussion, based on this discussion, we will make some changes, amendments, and we'll publish the new drafts in the Svetlana Tikhanovskaya website. Here, I think I should finish my presentation. I see Nana agrees with me. Last point, and we mentioned this yesterday. A standard question is, why are you raising this point? Why are you dealing with it? I want to repeat one thing. What we've been seeing in the last several weeks in Belarus is very unpleasant. Very often it's atrocious, scary, and it makes people depressed. But it doesn't mean that we should not follow our main goal, which is democratic change through elections. We definitely mustn't be afraid of elections. It's a normal process. Some say it's very expensive to hold elections, but I'm saying that it's been more expensive to not have proper elections. In order to have the proper elections, we need to prepare in advance. Therefore, we're having this conference today and we're having this discussion. Thank you for your attention. On my part, I'm really looking forward to further discussion and feedback from the colleagues.
Alex, thank you very much for this brief but quite a concrete outline of your agenda of work and to a large extent our main issues for discussion. We will come back to each of these four, I hope, as the other speakers will also be addressing those, and hopefully also from the questions of our viewers. Let me now hand the floor over to Alex Sulkov. Very briefly, let me introduce you, Alex to you. Alex is a national coordinator for the campaign Right to Choose. Право выбора. At the moment, the association unites 7 political parties and public associations across Belarus. These are Belarusian Popular Front, Belarusian Christian Democratic Party, Belarusian Social Democratic Party, Movement for Freedom, United Civic Party, UCP, Belarusian Green Party, the Party of Freedom and Progress, and the main goal of this the association, the movement, is to democratize, open up, and implement meaningful reforms to the electoral legislation in Belarus, with the overall goal of bringing about free and fair elections to Belarus. Alice, the floor is yours, and we'll look forward to your views.
Добрый день, друзья. Мне большая честь.
Hello and welcome, distinguished friends. It's a great honor for me to join your conference. I wish this conference took place in Minsk and it was held offline. We would understand one more thing, that sustainability of our society depends on the open and free election. It needs to be understood by everyone, both by the parties supporting current authorities and the opposition parties, because the open and free election shows to us the measurements, the temperature of all of the moods in the society, asking the question, if can we conduct the free fair election using the electoral code that we have? I would answer this with the words of the Belarusian politician. He says that using our code, we can easily conduct free fair election in Sweden, but somehow it doesn't work in Belarus. Why? 2 things are needed for that. First is the political will to hold free and fair election. The second most important thing is that we need to return trust to the electoral system of Belarus. It's a long process, but it's manageable. What are the four main aspects of this progress? First is the Electoral Commission formation. This process can be given an example. The Right to Choice campaign at the previous election proposed 716 people to the PCs, and our colleagues did put up even more, but none of the people ended up in the electoral commissions. Why? Because the process is really non-transparent. If it was, it would really solve many problems. Second is the preliminary election. It is a great procedure. In Belarus, this process went sour. Where was proposed that in the districts, about 30, 40 districts, we select one or two of them where a person can, the person who has reasons for this, would vote early. Others would work on the day of the election. Belarus is not particularly a wealthy country who can afford supporting 35 commissions during the early election. Next is the vote count. We have a principle that we very often discuss. The country that invented World of Tanks and Viber cannot somehow show the ballot contents to the observers, commission members, and the mass media. Somehow we're not doing this. Another point is observers. When we come across observation, for some reason the elections consider observer as an enemy. Now, an observer must be a rightful participant of electoral process. According to the legislation, the elections must be held openly and freely. One more important thing, the person needs to appeal the results in the court. And here comes the philosophical question. I'm in Belarus now. I hope that I'm still here after this conference ends. When we think what to do next, I think the next thing is to deal with the emotional level. All the Belarusians need to understand we are dealing with the sovereignty and independence of our country. How hard it is for us now. We need to discuss and decide on the rules of our life in the future, in the life of our children. A small example. In the past, I studied in 2007, 2008 in the Donetsk management school. I received a grant to go there. Some years later, all my friends, all my teachers, instructors, ended up in different countries. Some of them are in Russia, some are in Ukraine, and some are in Donetsk region. When I'm asking them why it happened this way, one of my professors said, friends, talk with people at all the levels. You need to understand that without dealing with the emotional problem, we can lose everything. People are interested in this election to be free, open, and democratic. Maybe none of the democratic representatives gets to the parliament or local council, but if the election is free and fair, it will be a great step towards Belarus being independent and sovereign state. Thank you very much for your attention. Together with Alexander, we have been actively working on this, and he actually covered 99% of what I wanted to cover. So I'm just doing it this impromptu.
Alice, thank you very much. And we indeed hope that you will continue to voice your strong voice and advocate for these processes from within Belarus, and we hope for your safety and well-being. We'll come back to your points, the important points that you raised during the discussion time. Let me now move to our next speaker, now from Ukraine, Olga Ivazovska. Olga is now a chairperson of the civil network Opora. Let me remind the viewers that Opora is Ukraine's leading civil society election observation network organization that brings together close to 25,000 activists to observe various national and subnational elections in Ukraine. With Olga's leadership, Opora has advocated for and led a number of important reforms in the electoral legislation in Ukraine, including, as far as I recall from my experience of watching these processes, reform of the electoral administration bodies, and indeed injecting that body with transparency and merit-based process of appointments. Let me also add that Olga participates in international electoral efforts very often. She is a member of the board of the Global Network of Domestic Election Monitors, a network that has championed unified and in a way synergetic approach to electoral civic local national electoral observation efforts across Europe, Eurasia, and she's also very active in a number of other democracy advocacy efforts in Ukraine and globally. Perhaps as the last point, Olga was included in the top 100 most influential and most successful Ukrainian women in the 2014-2020 census, or the report. Olga, the floor is yours, and we hope to learn from Ukraine's experiences, particularly when it relates to some of the more short-term reforms that Ukraine has implemented. Thank you.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые коллеги, аудитория, слушатели. Я надеюсь,
Good afternoon, audience, listeners, and hopefully the opponents. Whatever we think of it, the dialogue is impossible without the counterparts. I see many experts here, friends. Many of you know what our Opora network does. Many of you know about the history of the Ukrainian election. On the one hand, we may say that we have democracy in Ukraine, because even the Economist Democracy Index in 2020 showed that Ukraine is in a developed democracy with modern elections and competitive elections, and when the final result is not always known beforehand, because the people of Ukraine are actively influencing the process, unlike any other factors. While reading the current electoral code and learning about the proposals made by the independent electoral groups at various points in time, as well as the technical short-term proposals published on the website, I believe we should be more realistic, understanding the fair democratic election is possible in the country when first they're organized by independent CC, a body that's organize it on the local level, have among them representatives of many groups and political interests, not only by the authorities, but also by opposition. I believe that the PC level, it's impossible to change the election commission formation approach, but still I believe that advocacy groups should focus on electoral process being organized by independent bodies, or those that have among them a balanced representation of interests. groups. Unfortunately, short term, based on the proposals and the resolutions of the CEC, I think it's impossible to implement, because even the access to information during the decision taking and considering the delegates that are proposed for the PAC does not mean that the final result will consider the candidates who have the best electoral experience. So the CECs playing the major role here also believe that the oppositional group in Belarus and international experts need to understand that without this factor, the national electoral process will not be possible to organize. Consider the experience of the Ukrainian election 2004, when after Maidan, when after the decision of the Supreme Court, there was decision to transform or amend the Electoral Commission before the third tour of the political election. It was some kind of a compromise, without which it will be impossible to organize an electoral process that would have that would be trusted by the opposition and the people in power, respectively. Secondly, without the context of the election, without the campaign, it is impossible to state that the fair election could be organized only with the fair vote count. In Ukraine, the administrative resource doesn't affect the final result that much, because Ukrainians are not actively reacting to pressure and threats or from the side of the administration. Currently, we have operating in use many other technologies, but if the authorities are not interfering into the election, it is impossible to guarantee the fairness. Also, the role of the mass media is important here, because the materials, resources are very important here.
When the representative of a parliament close to the ruling party can secure the budgetary funding of region, and on the basis of this shape the strategy of electoral I don't think this is just a problem in the budgetary resource. And of course, the middle-term solution, well, short-term solution is the technology of election, but not the conditions for the shaping of elections. They should be focused on the topic of impossibility of using the administrative resource during the electoral campaign. We're speaking about the financial people, media, and especially, which is important in context of Belarus, is the law enforcement agency. The inability to conduct the electoral campaign due to the fact of being in jail, so the opening the criminal cases, which was the practice in Ukraine, but not it was not so numerous. Right now, we can say that this factor is eliminated in Ukraine, and the guarantees of security for the candidates and the subject of electoral process, the opposition cannot give those guarantees. These should be guaranteed by the people who has the administrative resource. If we speak about only the calculations of the votes and the publishing of the votes in Ukraine, we create a long-term observations to understand the context of the competitiveness and the fairness of electoral campaign. Then we calculate the statistical, the percentage of voters, and we're not interested in falsifying the numbers by buying out the voters, because the numbers in the reports will show this, and the groups that hold the open observation will play in the hand of the authorities. What we can do is create drafts and project of documents that have been published. We have those bases, but we also need to understand that we need to focus our attention on the administrative bodies, and we studied the recommendations of OSCE and other international organizations that were observing the elections in Belarus, and one of the top priorities in this regard should be the lists of voters and the data, the numerical data and the qualitative data related to the voters lists. The procedure of registration of candidates and the denial of candidates, the cancellation of decisions of registration of candidates in Belarus, and the drafts of projects that we saw and analyzed. And as we understand, the discussion is still ongoing in the expert groups, and it is based on the non-judiciary procedures, specifically about the cancellation of registration of a candidate that can lead to politically motivated decisions of electoral committees. So again, the guarantee of participation or in electoral process in Ukraine practice were implemented in 2012, even though in 2010 we had local elections that was not accepted as compliant with international standards, because those standards were violated on the level of electoral law. The candidates could be removed from the elections on the basis of violations from the candidates. To secure the candidates, we thought that we need to set the norms on whether this violation is administrative or a criminal one. Then the representatives should be responsible in terms of criminal code or administrative codes. But in terms of electoral, not in terms of electoral code, but because such kind of violation should be documented and proved, and should be pre-court investigation, but not just having two facts of thrown in promotion materials led to the removal of a candidate. This is unacceptable. So we've divided those tracks into several parts. If a candidate violates the electoral code, then the Central Electoral Committee warns them and spoils their reputation in the eyes of the voters. From the other side, if this violation was in the form of criminal or administrative way, then the candidate or their representatives are responsible for the criminal and administrative code, but separately from the electoral process. Taking into consideration the documents that we've analyzed and the experience of parliamentary elections in 2019, where mission which was not published, the number of voters and the list of voters were not accessible for the free familiarization with them. And this does not solve the solution of the transparency of registration of voters. There are some centralized processes, not on the level of the electoral code, but on the basis of the decisions of the Central Electoral Committee. We need to think about the ways to centralize the list of voters as it is. I've spoken about the administrative resource, but in Belarus, administrative resource is one of the key factors, and consequently, we can work both in a legal field to oppose it and in the way that we employ in Ukraine, where administrative resource is still a politological term. We work with the officials, we create the ways of communications, training sessions, so that these people understand the good practices and the bad practices. And if this practice is used for decades, the officials do not understand the request to they do not understand the request to violate the freedom of the elections. They understand that their involvement will lead to the free result. Then the way of non-participation should be realized on the stage of forming the electoral committees. And speaking about the collection and verification signatures too. I've seen the commentaries for these documents from probably Belarusians who speak that 100,000 signatures is too much for Belarus to have your candidates registered. I think that is a very relevant remark, and the argument that in Russia you have 15 times more voters and you still have to gather the same amount of signatures. So it's a very relevant remark. Unfortunately, the legal norms are working in the political context with the active participation of the subjects of the electoral process and non-governmental structures. I think in Ukraine only when the observers, independent observers, they received the status of subject of electoral process, we were able to influence the quality of the process. In 2011, we've introduced changes into the norms of selecting the people's representatives. So, and then we were given a right of subject. So to observe is not only to look, it's also to identify violation, document it, and then have the right to file a complaint on it. Not only the violation against personally myself as a observer, but against the electoral process itself. So you don't only gather information and publish a report, a news article or analytical material, but to properly document this event and then have the right to refer to court or to the law enforcement system that should have a political will to react to these violations. And beside that, I think that any kind of election today is a great amount of technology using internet platforms, social networks, where oftentimes, even in Ukraine, we're using and spending millions of dollars for promotions or direct communication with the voters in situations where the central TV stations, it's politically engaged, politically sided. We have a lot of popular TV channels that are controlled by different political groups. So the competitiveness and verification and multiplication of votes, then if you are a voter of a certain political group, you watch a certain TV channel, and if you are a voter of other party, you watch a different TV channel. But in Ukraine, people have the ability to watch both of either of the channels and to make up their mind on the basis of different sources. But as I know, in Belarus, the situation is different. And because of this, the internet and the social networks are the sources of the independent communication and ability to transfer your position to the voters without the influence of the pro-government mass media. I understand that I don't have much time to speak about details, but I'm ready to answer questions if you have any. And our organization will be ready to participate in other activities later.
Olga, thank you so much. Indeed, as I think we expected, having insights from Ukraine, it's some of its shorter-term urgent and longer-term electoral experiences is proving to be extremely valuable and interesting, I think, for our Belarusian actors, democratic actors. Olga, thank you again, and we will indeed come back, and I'll try and summarize all these key points towards the end of our discussion. Now, our next and the last speaker on this excellent panel, Dr. Yuri Chokan from Moldova. Let me also make a brief introduction of, otherwise, Mr. Chokan's long list of remarkable experience in the field of elections. He was the president of the Moldovan Electoral Commission from 2011 to 2016. He was a member previously as well as after he left the position of the president from 2016 to 2019. Beyond that role, well, but let me there note that under his watch and under his leadership, I think important to say that Moldova has deserved significant praise on its elections that were organized orderly, well administered, under conditions of free and fair elections, obviously with challenges and outstanding issues, but Mr. Chokan has been credited by this. I also want to underscore his one of his key achievements and disposed as creation of Moldova's permanent electoral training institution that has endured number of the time, and then it has evolved as really indeed the permanent center of excellence to provide training and expertise to not only electoral commissioners, but also civil society and broadly the public. And let me also say that Dr. Chokan has then assumed a number of other roles, including with the Center for Reform Implementation under the Prime Minister of Moldova between 2017 and 2019, where he has worked to reform Moldova's central public administration. Good to see him take part in this regional exchange of lessons for the benefit of democratic elections in Belarus. Yes, Dr. Chokan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for these very unmodest presentations from your part. But, you know, I will prefer to be heard without translations from our Belarusian persons who watching this video, and I will prefer to speak in Russian. Thank you very much again for presentations, and separately the thanksgiving words for international idea that everything that was done in Moldova, because really it was a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
На самом деле многое было уже сегодня.
So a lot of things were said today in terms of short-term measures that can be implemented. I want to stress the certain aspects that may have not been touched upon by the previous speakers, to not reiterate. Yesterday, Ms. Tikhanovskaya mentioned this yesterday, and other speakers spoke about it. In Belarus, there is a big request for dialogue. We understand there is not openness from both sides for dialogue. We see the initiatives that are banging the closed doors, but we need to continue to build the dialogue, because otherwise all our short-term suggestions, long-term suggestions will never be implemented, because unless the power changes, the power structure changes. There is a reason for that. But if you have the goal as holding free and fair elections, it will be difficult to conduct without the dialogue, because even if we don't need the deep changes of law, we need the changes of the procedure. the procedure of setting the members of regional electoral committees, the procedure of working with voters, the procedure of calculating the votes. It was mentioned today by the previous speakers about the procedure, because the easiest and the transparent procedure is when one of the members of electoral committee holds up the ballot and shows to the other ones. We have this method in Moldova for a long time, and in this way, and speaking up loud for whom this ballot is cast and showing it to everyone, this is how it's done. I'm a big supporter of law applications within the certain set procedures. In terms of electoral process, there shouldn't be any improvisation. There would be strict adherence to the rules and the procedures set by the Central Electoral Committee. And this is why we accredited the Central Electoral Committee in terms of standard of ESA for quality of providing services and for protection of the personal data. Why was it done? Not because we wanted to have a certificate behind the president of the committee, but to analyze all the procedures and to set the set of procedures for every category of the electoral officials of different levels, and each of them today understands what they have to do, which is the limit of their responsibilities and where it starts, and what should be done without any improvisation, without any deviations, without any I wanted to do something otherwise better. But so this should be the same on every polling place. So transparency of the electoral bodies is the key element. What we've done in Moldova, we've introduced electronic transfer of data from the polling place to the Central Electoral Committee, and posting the electoral reports in the polling place, usually on the outer door of the polling place, so that everyone could see this report, but it's at the same time is sent to the Central Electoral Committee electronically. And in this way, using the procedure, which is quite transparent for everyone, for observers, for representatives of electoral opponents, we hold the calculation of the votes in transparency, and we show the results to everyone as soon as the calculation is over, so that to prevent any ideas of manipulation of the ballots or reports by the physical transfer to the Central Electoral Committee from the local polling place. I'm adherent to the procedures, and what you, Alex, said during the beginning of the session, you're trying to set the procedures. I think it's a very important thing, and we need to strengthen it. But those procedures will only gain the strength only when within the dialogue, both parties, all of the parties will be interested in this procedure for the openness and the fairness and the results for the country, not for personal ambitions for Alexander Schlik or whomever, but for the fair and transparent elections for the people of Belarus. And I'm sure that everyone's interested in this. Through the procedures, through the dialogue, through the persuasion, we can achieve the result. This is not easy. And
in the Republic of Moldova, we went a long way of training either public servants or members of all the electoral commissions. We had a norm in the electoral code saying that you can be delegated to the election commission after you have a minimal training at the retraining facility. This way, we provided for a minimal, but the necessary level of knowledge, and which means that the knowledge will be increasing because the trainings are ongoing. We managed to form a group of people, about 20,000 people, which is a lot for Moldova. These people participate or are members of the PECs, and they have a certain code of ethical code, and you cannot force them to commit fraud or to break the law, because they know they will be observed by the observers, but the representatives of the political parties. The system works on the checks and balances approach. Through procedures, we have excluded the malicious influence on the procedures on the election day. But elections do not boil down to the election day alone. For them to be recognized as free, fair, and open, we need to conduct a free and fair electoral campaign. This way, we need to provide the access to the free media, to provide for freedom of expression, freedom for assembly, was mentioned by the international observers, including the OSCE representatives. But I go back to the dialogue. These changes, or any changes that will be proposed or have been proposed, will have the life cycle. When there'll be joint cooperation, yesterday I was happy to note in the presentation provided to us by the Ms. Klara Dobreva, who is representing the European Parliament. She says she believes in the coalition cup, and I believe that coalition approaches give opportunity to control or mutual control, and this leads to the formation of trust. In the future, when this joint control is reinstated, of course, we need to go deeper. Training programs need to be formed, and professionals need to be used, because our training center trains the prosecutors, police bodies, court system. There are several separate modules available for each group, for groups that that way influence the electoral process. Eventually, we managed to have a situation when every party involved knows very well what they have to do. I believe that the path that you chose in terms of using coming up with new procedures or making the current procedures more transparent is the right one. You need to be implementing it in the best possible way. I'm stopping here and I'm available for questions and remarks. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this discussion.
Mr. Jokan, thank you so much for these insights. I think we have plenty of points to reflect on. Some of the important comparisons are, I think, already possible across different speakers, and obviously comparisons between the situation we are facing in Belarus versus the situations that we've seen reforms take place in Moldova and in Ukraine. I have one additional speaker to our panel from NDI, National Democratic Institute, Belarus. And we also have interesting questions submitted by our participants, viewers, which we will also be addressing in the remaining period. Let me just make one, I think, key reflection at this stage. Now, I think important probably to say that if we compare Belarus with the situations that we've seen take place in Moldova and in Ukraine, probably one key point stands out, which is that in no other place, and in such as Belarus, such as Ukraine or Moldova, the degree of severity of a discredit, I would say, and the failure to comply with own national legislation and conduct elections with basic standards of freedom, free and fair elections, has been so severe as we've seen in Belarus.
May I say a few words here? if you allowed me.
Please.
You know it very well that Georgia, the same like Moldova, are part of Eastern Partnership. You know it. And during our activity of our countries, we have a clear component of electoral support in our country from European Union in programs of Eastern Partnership. You know that Belarus was part of this, and there is legally part of this Eastern Partnership. My question is, why Belarus are not invited in electoral component? You know, I have the precedent, precedent that very disappoint me. Then in 2015, in limit of one event, electoral events that was organized by CSC Moldova in Chisinau, we invite CSC Belarusi stay together with Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Ukraine, and Moldova. And our partners from Brussels said, no Belarus, speak between 5 of you. I was very disappointed at that time. But now, you know, we see that probably it was a mistake because we should involve these people. All people should be involved. All of us, we have some words to say, some idea to share, some good practice to share. Without dialogue, maybe I will repeat it, without dialogue, it's very difficult to build something. And I think now it's right moment to review our previous practice and move forward with new vision and new practices. Thank you. Excuse me that I interfered.
Thank you, and I believe this was an important addition to how you perceive the situation. I'm not here to respond particularly to that point or defend the electoral assistance providers from the European Union. But let me then just say that obviously we realize that the calls for reforming Belarus's electoral legislation are not new. I will just say that only going back to 2017, when we know democratic actors in Belarus were, let's say, making one of the most recent last efforts of dialogue with electoral authorities of their country. I also maybe, perhaps this is an excellent point to the time to say this effort at the time was led by Mr. Anatoly Lebedko, who unfortunately, as we speak, serves a 30-day administrative detention for largely his political and democratic advocacy, and on the absurd charges that have been filed against him. We wish all the best, of course, to Mr. Lebedko, and I hope for his quick release. Now, that effort of dialogue and trying to achieve minimal breakthrough and issues have been quite the same that we're talking about at the time, which is access for observers and the basic opening for registration of the candidates, etc., has not been adopted, as we know, in 2017 too. Now, so this is a long-standing problem, and obviously should not hope for a quick emergence of that political will. So going back to my previous point, I think all of the panelists today have addressed the two main issues, which is first and foremost how do we get to that electoral management authority that displays a basic ability to reform the procedures, display sufficient political will to engage in a good faith implementation of the existing legislation, with additions, of course, that will be possible and within their mandate. And after that, of course, what are the substantive issues that one should really prioritize? And we have a great list of items that we have now taken stock of. I won't be too long, but just maybe mention a few of them with Alex's 4 key areas of work, of course, as we know, the candidate registration, formation of the electoral bodies at all levels, candidate registration, transparency of the count, and the access for domestic and international observers. I think to that, Alice has added a few interesting and, of course, vital points. I noted here the ability to contest and appeal electoral complaints in front of independent judiciary courts. I think he also addressed importantly the transparency of the results and some of the really basic steps that it takes to count, to administer the count transparently, and also importantly, I think the early election, the need to limit the number of places and number of commissions that will be mandated to host those early elections and ultimately close the gaps for fraud. Then, of course, Olga gave us important points, additions regarding the administrative, the misuse of administrative resources. I think important here also to point the financial resources and the misuse of those by local authorities particularly and political parties, as well as the law enforcement and their power to influence the viewers, the voters, as well as I think the new point that was mentioned with the centralized voter registry or making somehow moving towards that cleaned up election. So I think I already covered Dr. Chokan's points, but perhaps one and the key being that even the regulatory and the sublegal reform would have to be accompanied by broad political consensus among the key actors on the electoral.
Nana, just 1 second. I think we have Jess waiting from NDI to make her point, couple of minutes, and then I think we'll need to be wrapping up before the next session.
Indeed, yes.
So,
Jess, I think you have now been upgraded as a speaker. So yes, National Democratic Institute from Belarus. Jess Brown, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. My name is Jess Brown from the NDI's Belarus program. I'm not in Belarus, but thank you to all the speakers and panelists. The variety of perspectives and the depth of experience has been quite interesting. I have a brief comment in line with Dr. Chokan's comments around political consensus. From NDI's vantage point, and as others in the panel have noted, short-term electoral reform is crucial. But not just the actually improving electoral procedures, but also restoring citizen confidence in elections. Voters will not be satisfied by something that they perceive as cosmetic changes from the side of the regime. They need to understand why a reform process is better and what it actually means. Basically, any changes to the conduct of elections in the strategy needs to be grounded in building citizen trust in the process. So while the conditions for citizen engagement in Belarus, as everyone here I'm sure knows, remain extremely challenging, we really think there is an opportunity to use tools and communication channels to engage citizens at a variety of stages. And such channels such as Golos, independent media, the social media channels of all of the pro-democratic activists and leaders, and adjustments to short-term electoral processes really need to be mindful of the mechanisms to both engage citizens, to build this confidence through civic education, and should be designed really to facilitate citizen independent observation. From our experience, and I'm sure I know everyone probably agrees, domestic citizen observation remains one of the key ways to raise confidence in elections. And this can be done through experienced citizen observation initiatives like Human Rights Defenders for Free Elections, the Right to Choose campaign, as colleagues today have spoken, as well as those who are unaffiliated citizen observers who played such a key role in 2020, such as Zuber and Golos and others. Historically, in Belarus, election observation has served as a key gateway to civic and political activism, taking root and growing political participation in a really meaningful way. And can once again play a role in this mobilization to encourage citizens to participate in electoral processes and in helping restore this trust. So that's my brief comment, and thank you again for the conference organizers and this very interesting discussion today.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you very much. Now, let's move to the few interesting questions we have been given from our viewers. One is a question about the use of webcams as a transparency tool, obviously, on in election precincts. Of course, we know they have been used in a variety of contexts, including some of the more authoritarian contexts. But perhaps Alex and Alice, question for you too: what place would you give them in the short-term reform? And of course, we'll have to go for very quick answers to be able to finish in time this session.
Олесь, может?
Ну, по поводу веб-камер, я
As to the webcam, I believe that would actually increase transparency. I know what our authorities would say to this, but things are changing. My personal opinion is that before we install web cameras, we need to bring back trust to the PCs and also to all the transparency in terms of ballot contents. I would agree with that, saying that the experience of using webcams that I know, but when I observed elections in various countries, it's a two-way sword. There are pluses and minuses. But Alice rightly noted that webcams and cutting-edge technologies are not the solution to the problem of the trust to the electoral authorities. We received a lot of feedback about us saying how to conduct free, fair elections. Some say, let's let the machine do the work, do it online. I know that hundreds of people are watching it now, but I must say that technologies do not help increase trust. The trust must be followed by the technologies.
Alex, I think your connection was not the best towards the end, but I believe we could still hear your main point. Let me move to another interesting question. I think it's the most difficult question, but let me still try and get your sort of quick answers. So viewers are asking, how do you see the reform or certain change of the in the central electoral administration in order to enable that short-term reform? I think as well here, Alice and Alex, your views will be key if our guests from Ukraine and Moldova may have some additions.
Может, я тогда здесь начну.
Maybe I can start here. So there are 2 points here. I completely agree with my dear friend Yuri Chekan that without the dialogue, a democratic country cannot be built. It will be very difficult, if possible at all. We need to have a dialogue. But at the same time, we have an issue: with whom can we have a dialogue about the elections at this point? It's a very difficult question. I've been reading the comments in YouTube. Let's don't give access those and these to the electoral process because they have been compromised. But I think for us, and I'm speaking not as a technical expert, but also from the political point of view, we need to demarcate it. The level of involvement of falsification of by different people in our country. There are people who give orders, and there are people who probably don't have the courage, the will, the possibility to say no. We have different approaches here. And I think that it is quite possible that those people who participated previously in the election process in the past can be in the electoral committees again. Maybe they won't be heads of committees or something like that, but for the process of reconciliation of our society, it will be important not to set new separation lines, but there are people who are directly involved in the falsifications, those who gave the orders and organized all of this. And I want to request the opinion and advice from our colleagues in Ukraine, where there is a change of power quite regularly, and the society continues to function. And maybe you already have, we can use some ideas from them.
If you have a few points, I think you mentioned 2003 elections already, so please tell us.
Спасибо. И Алекс все-таки...
Thank you very much. And Alex is speaking from the point of view of the former international observer as president of diplomatic organization. I can speak not very in diplomatic way. Yes, dialogue is a very important tool, but the question is, what is the goal of the parties that are talking? If the consensus is a result of the elections that in Ukraine in 2014, under the pressure of the civil society of Ukraine and the international community, the parties had to agree on the rules, but the committee who is headed by a person who falsified the elections or personally, how would I say it, or personally forced a certain way or communicated as intermediate from the third parties with the candidates, we understand what we're talking about, cannot enjoy any trust in terms of organizing elections in the future. What I'm speaking about is any situation in Ukraine of opposition. The Central Electoral Committee was rebooted because this body should enjoy the trust of the citizens, or at least should be equally distant from all the candidates and be separated from the problems that led to the crisis in the countries. And it is impossible to have dialogue with those participants. From another point of view, since 2014 in Ukraine, we had informal but essentially an amnesty for the members of the electoral committees who participate in the falsification. But the people on the local levels, they know who those falsifiers were, and we can say that under the pressure from the society, those people who falsified the results in the second stage of election, they did not participate in the third stage because they will enjoy minimal trust, and the rotation of the administrative bodies, it's a very important issue for any democratic process. And also dialogue around the norms of law. Yes, I understand the Belarusian parliament is shaped in a very different way from Ukraine, because even in 2014, when Ukraine, after the stress of the revolution, the representatives of the majority who came after the President Yanukovych, who left Ukraine, they had to take into consideration the interest of society, because this situation is that people don't want to leave Ukraine. They take responsibilities despite the colors under which they join the parliament. We heard some remarks on laws from our colleagues. The short term is very important, but in Ukraine it's been happening for 10 years. It's a step-by-step changes, but the legal norms is the thing that the Central Electoral Committee should base their actions on. And the same goes for every participant of the electoral process. And without the changes in the electoral process, and even speaking about the constitutional reform, I know that is essentially impossible, but also changes in the criminal court.
We are running out of time, but these are all critical points, so please finish.
Yeah.
Please finish. Yes, you still have a few seconds, please.
What I'm talking about is the short-term prospects cannot substitute the qualities of regulations, because the Constitution says the election should be held on the basis of law.
Thank you very much. We have 3 minutes and then we have to close the next session that will be addressing longer term electoral reform. We'll be starting immediately after this. So please stay on to our viewers if you'd like to listen to that. Alex, Alice, Yuri, or Olha, perhaps half a minute for your final closing comments. If there is anything really important that we have not covered, I'm sure we've covered the good ground, but so half a minute to each of you, and then we will close.
Я начну, если вы не против.
I'll start if you don't mind. In Moldova, after every election, the political situation changes. The political parties change, not completely, but after every election, most of the political parties either leave the parliament or they change their representation in the parliament. This is a result of the work also by the electoral bodies, highly qualified bodies, who does not allow the external influence on every stage, because the politicians stay politicians. They will try to influence the result of the election to sway it in their favor, but the highly qualified committees are created to oppose this influence. If we speak about the Central Electoral Committee of Belarus, I think the dialogue is important, and in terms of the dialogue, a formula should be created where every representative of all parts of society should have representation in the committee.
Alice, maybe you want to go now.
Друзья, большое спасибо.
Dear friends, thank you very much. I want to say that I cannot be surprised by many things, but I was surprised by success of Moldovan Central Electoral Committee, and I want to say that the education of the observers is very important, because you have to pass training and pass the test, because the person who is going to a polling place should know the law, should know his responsibilities and his rights. Olga, thank you very much, because you try to remove our pink-tinted glasses. We need to understand that the route to the democracy is a long and windy one. And thank you for every participant here, because we need to have this discussion. I understand that this dialogue is necessary, and everyone should understand that it is done for the benefit of the people of Belarus. It is regrettable that we don't have representative of the regime today, representative of other political sides, and we need this in the future, and this should not need to be understood. This was quite nice hour and a half of my life.
Very brief comment if there's anything, and then Alex, you will finish and we'll have to close the session.
Я лишь вспомню о книге.
I want just to recall the book of Václav Sylla-Bessyl, The Power of the Powerless. We need to create an ideal model of the electoral code and procedures, and the second, to mobilize the competencies in this sphere to be ready to hold elections, democratic elections at any moment.
Thank you, Alex. Floor.
Да, большое спасибо. Буквально...
Thank you very much. Just two things from my side, the most important thing that I've gathered from the discussion is that hour and a half is not nearly enough to dwell in the details. We'll continue. I already have a list of the topics that I would like to discuss in more detail, but right now I want to underline the two things. First, yes, what Ales spoke about just now, it is very regretful that we don't have a representative of the current authorities, because it will be beneficial to discuss what we're discussing with all the political sides, but in the future we'll continue inviting all who is interested in this. And I want also to talk to those who are watching us from the authorities. All that we want to do is not to have our revenge, is not to punish somebody. We're not speaking about the candidate who should necessarily win the next elections, good democratic elections, so that they are accepted. We're not talking about that. We're speaking about that without a normal elections, we'll stay in the crisis where we are right now. And the only exit from this crisis is new elections, and nobody's interested in this crisis, and we're looking at how the next step could be done, how the normal transparent elections could be held, so that maybe not everyone will be satisfied with the result, but everyone will be satisfied with the process. We're speaking about the next step, and the next during the next panel, we'll discuss what awaits us in the long term after we do whatever we can in the short term. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, and thanks, Nana, for moderation of the discussion.
From my side, that perhaps Alex, good to remind everyone that the documents that you have proposed for consideration are on tikhanovskaya.org website, waiting for more comments and reflections. And I think people should tune in for more open discussions on these issues. And yeah, thank you very much. We've had about 100 people today watching this on YouTube. I'm sure this will get more views when the link will become available. I hope tomorrow. We've had about 2,500 people watching the opening of this, the first day of the conference. So there's been definitely a lot of interest. And yes, on to now to the session on the longer term electoral reforms. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Большое спасибо, Nana.
Thank you very much, Nana. And right now, as a coordinator of this conference, I give the floor to myself as a moderator of the next working session. And once again, I want to say that it was very pleasant to participate in the possibilities of short-term reform of electoral process. And I'm sure that we'll find the solutions that allow us not to improvise too much, but to stick to the law at every stage. But as we started our discussion, the law is not perfect, and it needs to be changed, it needs to be adapted. And I think we'll concentrate our focus our attention during the next stage of discussion is a long-term reform of electoral process. Right now we can discuss not both the reform of electoral law, but also the laws related, relevant to the election process. We need to take into consideration the discussion from different sides, civil discussion, maybe some changes in the constitution, and it would be very interested to see steps and how the constitutional changes would go along with the changes of electoral process. And I think that besides what we want, what we need to discuss main elements of electoral law, would be very interesting to look at maybe some non-standard solutions, maybe some ideas that are not obvious at the first glance, and maybe to look at which discussions we can stage going forwards to look at some solutions. So even some unorthodox ideas that can help us create a stable and good reform of the electoral process. We also want to speak not only about what needs to be changed, but how it can be changed. And here I'm very glad that we'll have two experts from Belarus, and unfortunately, again, the representatives of the current authorities of Belarus did not react to our invitation. But at the same time, I'm very glad and grateful to our international colleagues, Ms. Zhvania and Mr. Zholnoki. But before the turn goes to our international colleagues, I want to give the floor to our famous election expert, Ms. Branitskaya. She is famous in electoral circles for a long time, maybe for like 17 years already. And she participated in observation both as a local observer, domestic observer, and international observer. Emira also conducts her activities in other fields, protecting the rights of people with disabilities. And besides the activities that Emira does, she is a person who has academical knowledge. She is a Magister of European University of Bordeaux of Law. And on the basis of practical and academic experience, I would give the floor to Ms. Branitskaya, and thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alexander. Thank you for the organizers. It is very pleasant to be in this nice company, but also to speak about those issues. In reality, one of my colleagues says we need to start to dream, to start how the democratic Belarus will be, and to hold in the comprehensive electoral reform is a constant recommendation for OSCE and from the domestic observers and other international bodies. So, well, there were some attempts of minimal changes of local law, but also concept of big reforms. But all of them were based on the existing laws and introducing changes into them. But the situation right now with the existing laws, the alternate forces will not be given opportunity to change. So we may need to critically approach the existing things, and I think we need to find the best model for Belarus, and I think that it's never too early to do that. And I want to present several technical ideas on how the future electoral laws might look in Belarus. I will not touch the electoral system in principle, it's more of a political issue, but I want to share the ideas about the technical side of things and the critical things of holding the elections. First is organizing the elections.
We'll start with the professional bodies that organize the elections, and we need to make them autonomous. It may sound radical because in many traditional countries, such bodies are founded on the political representation, and this approach to the formation very rarely is practiced in the developed democracy countries. It was expected that it will increase the trust to political actors, but it doesn't really work. Instead of that, there are manipulations and suspicion. The actors who can control the electoral process can get something from it using manipulation. And those who are not represented in the commissions do not trust these commissions. The practices for registering phantom parties and their experience of selling places in such commissions. An alternative here is the autonomy in information, such bodies. Also the provision providing the high professional work. An example is Spain, the CCs, the body that has 13 members, 8 judges and 5 professors. The middle level commissions have 4 or 5, and PCs have 2 members, which are elected through draw. Out of all members, people registered at the PC. Well, they're a very specific approach, but it doesn't really take them much time to count the votes. In Belarus, the CEC could, let's say, consist of 9 people appointed by the parliament from the list of the people presented by the non-political and NGOs. Let's say the Academy of Sciences, the Union of Lawyers, and possibly the Council of Rectors of Universities. The CEC members should have the guarantees of being independent, just like the Supreme Court judges. Maybe we should think about the CEC management to be leaving the position at the middle of their term. There'll be special commissions formed of the pools in each district that unites people that are trained to do that. They need to regularly be retrained. We mentioned today that training and retraining is very important for the electoral bodies. Next, the people needs to pass various tests. Of course, the political parties are particularly interested in how they can follow the electoral process. It could be done through same old observation. Next topic is the candidate registration. There needs to be a political pluralism and a fair competition. The access to the election should not be too much of a barrier, which is we have observed in Belarus. Major criteria here for a candidate or party to get access to the elections is the support of the electorate and checks of their seriousness, usually done through some payment, one-off payment. The proof of the electoral support depends on the system, and the amount of this payment depends on different things. Let's look at the Netherlands. Political party to participate in the local election needs to, in every district where it wants to run, to provide signatures of only 30 signatures. That needs to be given with the municipal representative present. Parties at the high level do not need to have this. Also for Belarus, I believe we need to pinpoint the minimal number of signatures needed to be collected, but they need to be clearly verified by the special body or notary. This way we can solve the problem of verifying signatures that we face in Belarus. Also, I think Belarus is ready to introduce electoral payment that could be returned to candidates and parties that get a minimal result, let's say 1% in the district. Another important topic which has been a problem in Belarus, and for me personally as a lawyer, is the appeals and the contestation. I think we need to separate these two functions, the electoral function and the contesting function. I think each of the groups of parties need to occupy themselves with this process. Very often it takes too much time to review the case. Also, to review a complaint, you need to have a significant experience and qualification. What it would look like for Belarus, the complaints about the actions of the commissions before the electoral day could be addressed to the CC that would review them in the administrative order. For the court review and complaints about other bodies, there should be created a special court. There shouldn't be any additional spendings on this. These will be judges of the district courts and higher courts, and randomly they could be selected by the CC to be members of two court instances. First is the appellation level that would review only the electoral complaints. These judges also need to be regularly retrained. I don't think it will be a problem either. On the election day, the complaints about the violations will be recorded by the PC and then analyzed by the CC in order to understand whether they affected the election result. But the PC will not deal with these complaints. And also, dealing with the complaints about the results of the election will be done in the court order. Of course, this right should be given to the observers, candidates, parties, and voters. I think I'll end here. I just want to reiterate what was said, that it's not too early to start discussing this and looking for new models. I think this very conference could be the great start for this discussion. Thank you. Thank you very much, Anira. In fact, Anira has already forced many of us to think what is real, what is possible, and how to dream about something bigger than we thought we could dream of. I think our next speaker will help us with another aspect. Mr. Lev Margolin, who's a famous person in Belarus, who's a politician, expert. Currently, he's a coordinator of the working group on new constitution. It is very important for us that Mr. Margolin found time to join us, because the issues of constitutional reform and constitutionality is intrinsically linked with the electoral issues that Anira touched upon. We may as well discuss where the electoral system may appear in constitution, but there are fundamental rights and separation of powers. It would be interesting to hear Mr. Margolin to say more about this. Lev Fyodorovich has a great experience of observing elections, has experience of political struggle, and at the same time has a very pragmatic and clear approach based on the fact that him being an economist for many years, not only by his background, but also by his practices. Lev Fyodorovich, the floor is yours. Thank you, Alexander. First of all, I would like to thank the international and Belarusian experts, and also to those who are interested in the future of our country, who understand that every democratic order is based on the electoral system. During the first panel, we discussed how to hold a free and fair election in the framework of the existing system by regulating the law enforcement practice. A number of times we have analyzed the situation in the framework of right of choice, campaign, and others. And we concluded that it is possible in general, particularly in the conditions of the increased political activities, activity of Belarusians, and high dependence between the elections and the political situation in the country. But we once had democratic election in Belarus. It was back in 1994 when fairly, with significant support, Mr. Lukashenko was elected as the first president of Belarus. Later, not a single election was recognized by the international observers and the OSCE in particular as free and fair. In order not to repeat this sad experience, so that the first elections in the free democratic Belarus would not become the last one, we need to come up and build a tough legal base and create institutional foundation for the electoral system that would totally independent of the existing authorities and that would provide for competitive nature and transparency and freedom of the electoral process at all the levels. Enira has mentioned many of the points, and I'm glad to support, to echo what he said. It is to this that the third draft of the new constitution is dedicated, that was developed by the Public Commission. Here we're based on the best international practice, recommendations of the Venice Commissions, the OSCE, recommendations of the international experts, including the highly esteemed Olga Ivanzovskaya, who was present here. We're very grateful to them for this. This part is present not in all constitutions, because fortunately in some countries people could not even think of putting such obvious things in the constitution. Considering our negative experience in the past, we decided to have a more detailed approach in this respect. Maybe some would think that it is superfluous, but the project authors thought that the things that created problems in the past must be made very clear. So, institutional provision. I would dwell upon several points. The CEC, Constitution of 1994, with the further amendments, didn't have any article dedicated to the CEC. This allowed in the future for the president to fully take control of the electoral process. As of today, the CEC consists of 12 members, 6 of whom are appointed by the president, and the other 6 are appointed by the High Chamber of Parliament, which is also in the end formed by the president. In our constitutional draft on the CEC formation and various commissions, there is a special article that consists of 9 points. We discussed various approaches to CEC formation. The current approach presupposes 3 major points here. 2/5 of the are delegated by the Parliament, 2/5 by the Supreme Court, and 1/5 by the President. The CEC members will be professionals employed for 6 years. It's more than an electoral cycle, with every 3 years, with half of the Commission subject to rotation. The chairman will be elected to 3 years. For you to better understand what is happening now, here again the chairman is appointed by the president, and his deputy is also agreed by the president. So we shouldn't really get surprised by the stable and undemocratic electoral results. The commissions of the lower level will be formed by the high-level commissions. In the constitution draft, we're not delving deep into these approaches. It will be written in the electoral code. Currently, the formation of the local commissions is done by the local authorities, who are appointed again by the omnipotent and omniscient president of Belarus. At the same time, our draft limits the number of the representatives of the one enterprise or organization in single commission. It is important for us because one of the major factors of election rigging is the formation of the PECs based on one enterprise, and usually the head of the commission is represented by the director or deputy director of this enterprise. It is mentioned in particular that all the commissions are independent, and the attempts to influence them could lead to the prosecution. Their decisions are binding for all the bodies, including the local bodies. Other constitutional parts describe the voting days, because in the past in our country we had various manipulations with the electoral date when president on his own volition either increased or shortened the professional terms of this or that body. It exists in the last example was when the MPs stayed in power for 2 years longer. Other points that should make the electoral system more stable. We suppose that changes in the electoral code will be introduced by the two voting process of divided by the two different parliaments. Here, the increase in the number of subjects that could contest the decision of the CEC in the Supreme Court, and there are two more things that are aimed at creating the electoral process of Belarus more democratic. They're about providing right to elect or to vote to the inmates in prison. So if the sentence was not passed or yet, the inmates should have the ability to vote. Prosecution, of course, cannot consider and counting all the points. Many things should be stipulated by the electoral code, but overall, I think that the proposed changes will allow to make the electoral process as democratic as in other European countries. The draft is not final, of course. Here, there may be and there will be some arguments on different points, and we're very happy to get feedback from everyone. We'll be happy to consider all the remarks. There are many things that needs to be solved at the level of the code. First and foremost, it is the voters registry, the order of agitation and political voting, and this commission formation. If we manage to solve all these problems, I'm sure that we'll be able to have a democratic electoral process for many years ahead. Thank you. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I believe many of you, many of readers, of viewers found your remarks very interesting.
And I think this is the main point of open public work on developing the project of both of constitution and electoral codexes. Thank you very much once again.
And introduce our two international colleagues. It is a great honor and a privilege for me to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Madam Tamar Zhvania, who is very well known in the world of elections. Ms. Zhvania is the chairperson of the Central Election Commission of Georgia. She has been the chairperson of the commission since 2013. She has been elected as the chair for the second term in 2018. She has the master's degree in sociology. I understand she's pursuing the PhD in sociology, so soon to be named Dr. Zhvania. But I understand that, and I know that for a fact that Madam Zhvania is extremely busy. running the elections in Georgia and also being involved in the ongoing electoral reform efforts in the country. So today, I am very pleased that we have a chance to hear from Madam Zvania based on her experience, first and foremost, as the chairperson of the Central Election Commission, but also looking back at your international experience with the UNDP, your experience of working with the domestic organization of EastFed. You have such a multitude of different viewpoints. So I'd be very interested to, and I'm sure our participants will be very interested to hear on what are the good approaches and what are the good lessons to keep in mind for when we will be pursuing the longer term electoral reform in our home country. Thank you very much once again. It is a great honor to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for giving me this opportunity and the floor to speak. Warm greetings from Georgia to all the participants. This is really great pleasure for me to participate in this event. So, dear colleagues, it's my really privilege and pleasure to speak on behalf of Central Election Commission of Georgia to participate in a very important international conference, Democratic Elections for Resolution of Crisis in Belarus. I would like to thank the organizers, of course, of the event for allowing us to discuss election reform in terms of resolving the political crisis in the country. Notably, constitutional reforms are made when systematic changes are needed, as they help to substantially change the political climate and have the potential to de-escalate the situation. Concerning constitutional amendments, we have history of amending our constitution, and most recently we made big changes to our constitution. Before I cite the key constitutional amendments, I cannot stress enough the significance of consensus necessary between different stakeholders, public debates, and greater media coverage for the success of the mentioned process. The agreement on amendments to be made to the most significant document for any country in question needs greater understanding and agreement among different actors and appropriate publicity, guaranteeing to inform the general public. The role of the international partners and organizations working in the field of elections is central as they, and the most importantly, OSCE provide us with recommendations which we, after deliberation, follow to greater extent. We also consider suggestions of domestic civil society organizations, CSOs, and regularly share our ideas of how election procedures can be simplified and what we, as election management body, MB, can do for that matter. In fact, as the MB, we can propose only procedural changes to the electoral processes as it is within our competence, and topics that need political will and decisions go beyond our mandate. But speaking of consensus and the procedure, how we approach this issue and how election reforms are made in Georgia, first, the Parliament of Georgia sets up the election reform group comprising political parties, international and domestic non-governmental organizations, as well as a Central Election Commission. Our role is to advise and share our expert opinion as we are implementing body of any election reform and may anticipate how any initiative can be carried out in practice or what are the constraints of any proposed initiative on the ground. The given group works on recommendations issued by the international organizations and CSOs for consideration. Such election reform groups were established in different years, and right now this group is very actively involved in the ongoing process as well. When it comes to big constitutional change, State Constitutional Commission is established, of course, in Georgia, which operates within a wider format and includes more stakeholders than the election reform group. Notably, most recent constitutional amendments were prompted by different actors, including CSOs, political parties, and the general public, demanding moving to a proportional electoral system. Recent amendments made to the Constitution of Georgia and election code for 2020 elections substantially changed the electoral system, improved some norms, eliminated inconsistencies, shortcomings, and simplified some election procedures. As a result of the given reform, many significant systemic changes were made to the legislation, and most fundamental refers to moving towards a more proportional electoral system. Additionally, a mandatory gender quota was set, political party registration was simplified, and most importantly, a more proportional system prompted more political party representation in the legislative body. To give you a brief overview of our recent political developments in Georgia, following the 2020 parliamentary elections, we also experienced a crisis when opposition political parties rejected to enter the parliament. The situation was really challenging as given amendments were made to improve the electoral process and having representative democracy, meaning having a wide variety of parties, new and old ones, simplified electoral procedures, more women in the legislative body, and without having opposition parties in parliament, all these constitutional and legislative achievements were under the question mark. But again, with the involvement of our international partners, parties, political parties, international and domestic NGOs, the situation has de-escalated and opposition parties now entered the legislative body. Thanks to these amendments, we have improved the electoral process in general. Additionally, we have newly established parties in parliament that would not have a chance to enter the legislative body without given amendments. Now parliament is more inclusive and pluralistic. As I mentioned earlier, we as election administration also submit legislative proposals to the parliament that cover procedural issues and not systemic ones. A group working on election reform usually includes a member of the election administration, as we are practitioners, and poses the necessary expertise political parties may, of course, lack. More specifically, our role as EMB is to assess elections, see how different norms are being implemented into the practice, receive, of course, experience from previous elections, including identifying problems revealed in practice, and then submit proposal of procedural nature to the parliament. To give a good example of how election reforms are made in Georgia, let me cite our most recent reform yet to be implemented. The new initiative refers to the adoption of new technologies in electoral procedures. Right now, there is a stage of deliberation with political parties concerning the introduction of new technologies in elections. What is important? We all together, the CEC and political parties, and later we will also involve CSOs, we discuss what and how technologies can be implemented. This discussion format is facilitated by our long-term partner, IFES, but it is all now hosted by the Central Election Commission of Georgia. So here again, will election administration help political parties to see the possibilities and the scale of such innovations, as well as to help them to see the risks associated, of course, with this process. This process is ongoing right now in Georgia, and I hope this reform will be successful after the first trial and the pilot. Once again, I would like to emphasize the significance of the participation of all relevant actors in discussion of election reform, concluded, of course, by consensus. As EMB, I think we should take the lead, open the discussion on pressing issues, give a platform to political actors and CSOs, and support the implementation of recommendations received by our international partners and domestic NGOs. We can be as creative and innovative as the election code and constitution enables us to do so and to be, and I believe we can be even more than implementing body. and initiate legislative proposals within our mandate that can improve the electoral procedures. With this, I just would like to thank all participants as well as organizers of the event. I also hope that our Georgian experience will help to think about different ways of approaching election reforms. The implementation of election reforms is significant to improve electoral process and in some cases also to resolve the political crisis in the country. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Большое спасибо, Didi Madlova.
Thank you very much.
This is a real pleasure for us to have you here. I think you raised a couple of really important points of seeking the consensus, but also the important role that the election management bodies, the central election commissions, play in the process of election reforms, of highlighting the critical issues, of leading the process very often, even if they sometimes do not have the legislative initiative rights. But your experience is definitely worth studying in more detail, and I think we will continue our cooperation. Our next speaker is Mr. Zsolt Szolnoki. He is the representative of the Association of the European Election Officials, and namely the Secretary General of the association. The association brings together 25 institutional members, and I think that Mr. Szolnoki will be able to share with us the experience that goes beyond one single election management body, but has a comparative perspective as well. It is a great pleasure for us to have you here, Mr. Szolnoki. This is a privilege indeed, and I know for a fact that there is a lot that we can learn from you, and there is a big chance for us to exchange our ideas with you and your organization as well. With this, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for the kind words, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting the ECTPO for this important event. I have to say that being the last speaker is almost a mission impossible. We have excellent presentation. Even what can I say after our two distinguished former president of the association, Mrs. Tamar Zvalia and Dr. Yuri Chokan. But I try to let's say highlight some issues, because I think that speaking about today the long-term implications of democratization and the importance of the electoral reforms, the topic absolutely underlines the validity of the core values of our association, as it was determined already in 1991 upon the establishment of the ACTPO. And in brackets, we are 30 years old, so this organization is getting older and older. So our mission has been to provide a non-partisan forum, an independent of national governments, for the exchange of information among election officials and experts throughout the region, and to discuss and act upon ways to promote open and transparent elections with the objective of support the good governance and democracy. And the ECTPO is, of course, is the gathering of election officials. We are a forum or a platform where we can discuss the different aspects of the elections. And this is a community to support each other if needed. So 30 years of the operation of the ECTPO showed that this mission is not outdated so far. Back to 1997, the Central Commission of the Republic of Belarus on election and holding Republican referenda requested a membership in the ECTPO, and in 1998 the CEC of Belarus joined to the association. And we were, I think it was, we were very happy that in 3 years later, as the only international organization, we could organize an election observation mission to the presidential election in Belarus. In the course of this mission, long-term observers were able to follow with attention the whole election procedure. And in the last phase of the mission, 61 short-term observers from 11 countries represented the association. And on the election day, 27 teams of 2 visited more than 200 polling stations around the Republic of Belarus. The final report of the mission highlighted that the CEC managed the electoral process well. However, during the electoral campaign, there were reasons for concern, and the mission has also voiced some concerns regarding to the imbalanced campaign financing, the imbalanced media coverage, and foreign interference during the electoral campaign. And of course, there was some other violation of the electoral process, like the procedure for sealing the ballot boxes in an inappropriate order, the absence of the secret ballot booths, or for example, some international observers were denied information about the course of the election. And at least from my point of view, one of the key issues that the aggregation of the result could not be monitored by our mission. Thus, the final report aggregated recommendation concerning the improvement of the nomination and registration of candidates, campaign finance, as well as the training of the electoral management and domestic observers as well. Since this mission, the ACPPO monitors, of course, the activities of the Belarusi CEC through the reports issued by the CEC itself. And of course, we also follow the different reports, mainly from OSCE ODIHR. And of course, we both the OSCE ODIHR and of course the ACPPO has discovered some improvement. But what is still remains that of course that the legal framework does not fully comply with international standards. And that's why I'm citing something which happened 20 years ago, that this is my big concern, is that the transparency of the election, it is still not ensured. So regarding to the long-term issues, we believe that in case the country really starts on the path on the democratization, the biggest threat is a backsliding, that in 5 or 10 years, the newly created electoral or the reformed electoral system is modified in a partisan way. So for this reason, we believe that the integrity of laws and elections should be safeguarded on the level of the constitution by procedural rules. For example, by enhanced majority requirements that requires broader consensus when the system is changed with, for example, absolute or 2/3 majority, or 1 year freezing period as recommended by the Venice Commission as well, or other requirements that prevent manipulation. For example, that the change rules are to be applied not at the upcoming election, but at the one after. Moreover, a constitutional entrenchment is sensible only if it is enforced and if the most important principles are effectively guarded. In this regard, the electoral reform necessitates the constitutional reform that ensures that the basic fundamental rights and the democratic principles are not only on paper, but prevail in reality as well. These changes are absolutely necessary, but it is assumed that the newly forming democratic states will have a new constitution. The substance of any reform is partly determined by core democratic principles, but it is also partly left open. Free and fair elections require a general, equal, and secret ballot that ensures the free expression of the people. These are internationally accepted requirements without which we cannot speak about free and fair elections. Also, elections cannot be held without the freedom of speech and association. Also, independent electoral administration and effective electoral observation are the cornerstones of free and fair elections. However, there is no universally accepted political process or electoral system. The political community of Belarus should have the chance to experiment with different institutions. Nevertheless, in a newly forming democracy, it might be key not to let too much political power to be accumulated in the hands of one political institution. For this regard, the proportional system or the German-style mixed-member proportionality system that gives proportional results might be recommended. As a broad range of electoral legislation is left open, there is enormous emphasis on the process. The process should be transparent and all key stakeholders should be involved. The most important stakeholders, of course, are the citizens, the voters. For this end, a kind of citizens' assemblies might be formed, assemblies that consist of randomly selected citizens who learn and consult electoral matters. An example is in the 2002 assembly created, for example, in British Columbia. It is of utmost importance that the citizens understand and embrace the electoral system to be enacted. Other key stakeholders, of course, are the political actors, both from the government and the opposition, international observers and experts. Furthermore, it is of most importance that from the early stage of the process of the electoral administration should be independent and credible, should be accepted by any parties, by the government or opposition, as well as trusted by the citizens. As well as it should be able to build accountability and reputation and maintain the electoral integrity. We believe that a strategic roadmap might be useful to restore the core elements of free and fair election as mentioned above. We think that the OSCE ODIHR final report from 2016 on the election in Belarus is a sufficient point of departure. Its priority recommendation include the most urgent issues. I think it was broadly discussed yesterday and today. Moreover, generally, the Venice Commission Code of Good Practice in Electoral Matters is an electoral Bible involving the European electoral heritage and best practices. Then a comprehensive reform can take place that determines those elements that are left open by international and regional documents and recommendations. It is important that ample time is allotted to the reform and the process of establishing strong democratic institutions and stable the electoral law. Finally, I would like to once again reaffirm that the ACPO community, in line with its core mission, is dedicated to promote open and transparent election with the objective of supporting good governments and democracy. Therefore, we remain ready to support the professional processes reflecting the will of the people of Belarus. And I do hope that all the related international organizations, most of us represented here during this 2 days conference, we are together with a common effort can support this kind of development activities for Belarus. Thank you very much for your attention, and back to you, Alexander.
Огромное спасибо, господин генеральный.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General Zsolt. We're very happy that you found an opportunity to join us. I think I will focus on 2 points. Here, first is the major role of recommendations. I'm sorry, I have some background noise of a barking dog. You highlighted the role of international observers, and I fully agree with you here. Secondly is that the citizens are the major actors in the electoral reforms. Using this, and regarding this, I see that Mr. Goran Petrov from OSCE ODIHR, who used to be Deputy Head of Mission, would like to present the OCOD recommendations. I'm happy to give him floor for this. Mr. Petrov, you have 4 or 5 minutes before we move to discussion.
Господин Петров, сейчас попробуем включить вам и видео, и звук. Да, пожалуйста.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Да, мы вас слышим. Пожалуйста.
Thank you very much. Спасибо. So I was asked by ODIHR to attend this conference today in its name to briefly recall recommendations from the past ODIHR missions. Several speakers have already kindly referenced them. I was, as you introduced me, I was the deputy head of mission on the last election observation mission that was deployed to Belarus, and that was in 2019. In total, with our partner organizations, we had a total of 432 observers from 45 participating states. So our 2019 report is a comprehensive document pointing at various serious issues that led us to conclude and to report that the elections did not meet important international standards for democratic elections. In short, we observed that the opposition was stifled, that the opposing voices were muted in multiple various ways. In terms of the voting process, we clearly identify several elements of electoral malfeasance by election authorities. So our 2019 final report contains 9 priority recommendations and 32 in total, which is a solid number of recommendations that need to be addressed in the future. Most of our priority recommendations are actually longer term, as they address the need for comprehensive reform of the electoral legal framework. But some address very specific elements, for example, integrity of the early voting and the counting of votes, which was extensively discussed already in these 2 sessions. We first recommend that the legal framework should be comprehensively reviewed to address long-standing previous recommendations from both ODIHR and the Venice Commission, including on previous, composition of election commissions, candidate rights, observers' rights, and safeguards for election day procedures and counting of votes. Furthermore, we recommended that the election legislation should be aligned with international standards in terms of the most fundamental civic and political freedoms, which are those of association, assembly, and expression. These are the bare minimums that need to be adopted. Looking into some specific but crucial issues that need to be addressed, I would put them in 2 groups. One is related to meaningful electoral competition or participation of the electoral contestants. And the other one would be about voting process that would bring genuine election results. In the Belarusian context, I think these are the 2 groups of election elements that absolutely must be safeguarded to prevent the hijacking of elections. For how can a candidate be elected if they are prevented from being listed on the ballot? Or how can one win an election if the results of the counting are not based on voters' choices, but there is credible indication that they are reported dishonestly? On meaningful electoral participation, it starts from the possibility for political subjects to freely associate into political parties and officially register them, then rally support by collecting signatures for candidate registration and do that freely, then get registered as candidates without facing some of the arbitrary imposed administrative obstacle, taxation documents, and then run campaign freely and without threats and detentions for doing so, both of candidates and their supporters. And then finally, not get deregistered for some minor grounds, often on dubious grounds, actually. Each of these elements has tied to a specific recommendation in our report, most of them priority recommendations. Each of these elements need to be seriously considered, discussed, and finally implemented, which will of course take both time and persistency. In which order? I really think it doesn't matter. Starting from anywhere would be a good thing. On the process of voting, counting, tabulation, and reporting of election results. First, voters should not be pressured to go out and vote in a particular manner. We are talking especially about numerous state company employees and public employees. And then the integrity of the voting should be safeguarded, especially having that in past we have observed practices of serious violation concerning, for example, early voting and mobile voting. then votes ought to be counted genuinely. For this, the observers must be able to observe the counting process more closely and not be forced to sit 3 meters away from the counting table. As you said, we need to be able to see the ballots. Finally, both turnout and results should be reported by polling station by polling station, to ensure that the aggregate results are based on something real and be possible to check by anyone. Again, all of these specific items that I listed now contain specific detailed recommendations in our report. And to finish, once again, many of these crucial recommendations are long-standing, and none have been addressed or even seriously considered. I think these constitute the minimum requirements to start thinking about level playing field and genuine democratic election contests in the future Belarus and in the long term. Thank you very much, Alex.
Огромное спасибо, Горан. Мне лично очень приятно.
Thank you very much, Goran. I'm very happy that the OSCE ODIHR found an opportunity to give floor to expert like you, Deputy Head of Mission at the latest ODIHR election observation mission in Belarus. I think that your presentation could be a great starting point for our discussion. Unfortunately, I don't see many questions coming from our participants. Please, welcome to do that by writing questions in the Q&A section. Goran has mentioned several types of recommendations. All of these recommendations should be prioritized, like formation of the Commission's right, of the candidates' right, of the voters' human rights, recommendations, tabulation, and count. I have questions to all the panel experts. What do you think? Which of these priorities are the most important, or we shouldn't really think that any of them could stand out there? Let's follow the same order that we used to give you floor. Anira. Thank you. Since I'm a person living here, I hope that to live here in the future, first priority for me, major priority, is the human rights observation. We have touched upon this topic yesterday and today, just like in the previous discussion in the past. So the basic observance of the political rights is the prerogative here and the priority here, at least for me. Thank you, Anira. Lev Fedorovich Margulin, please. In my opinion, this issue cannot have an abstract response. In abstract terms, I do support Anira. Political rights are most important, but in terms of current situation of the public upheaval and increased consciousness of the public, I think it's enough to implement several simple things mentioned in the previous panel that could be done without changing the legislation, like forming commissions, solve the issue with improved observation of the early voting and the vote count. This way, we could hope to have elections that are held in a fair and open way. Tamar, based on your experience, are there any things that solely or would solve issues?
So maybe I will divide the reform process in two sections. One part is systemic changes. And when it comes to systemic and as a political type of the changes, this is really crucial. If you have procedural changes, some avoiding some malpractices and some possibilities for fraud, it is not really guaranteeing to have real and good elections. We need to really think and start to develop some systemic changes when it comes to electoral system, when it comes to the composition of election administration. I fully agree with Anira and with the colleague that human rights, electoral rights are fundamental, but if you do not have the system to ensure this implementation of this right, and if you do not have the body who will implement this in practice, then this is the problem. So I think we need to divide all the reform process, the priority to make to the systemic changes, such as electoral system, which guarantees more political representation, such as composition of election administration, of course, based on the electoral and human rights. And then after that, we can also think about procedural changes, because we also can find some devils in procedures.
Большое спасибо, да, это, я думаю, очень интересный подход разделять две вещи.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting approach to divide the things, fundamental systemic changes and the technical and legal solutions. Zsolt, do you have any comparative practices, how it works in other countries?
Yes, thank you very much, Alexander. When you first put the question, of course, my immediate reply would have been the one package approach. But I have to say I fully agree with Tamar that at least this kind of prioritization between the changes of the core issues or the system, and then let's say followed by the change of the procedural system, this is absolutely a right approach. But I would of course also add that at the same time let's say it's a voter education or something again, so the preparation of the citizens and the explanation for the citizens why this kind of changes is needed and what basis and what would be, let's say, the benefit for it, it should start immediately as well. So even before we start. So that would be my 0 point before we start any new systems or procedures introduced to the political arena, of course, and to the citizens as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Using the fact that you spoke in the past, I go back to one of the points that the citizens must be in the center of the electoral reform. And here I would like to go back to our agenda of this conference. We would also like to consider the political parties. Here I have a question. For many people speaking here today, maybe for Ms. Zhvani in particular, you are as the head of the CC, you are representing your citizens. At the same time, you are closely connected with political players and political parties. How do you balance the interest of the political players and the citizens, because they do not always coincide?
Actually, I fully agree. They are not really, they do not have the same interests, of course. And the most problematic issue, including for Georgia, is that some political parties, they really have some particular political interests rather than state interests, which is like the still matter of the political culture. And this is our priority now in the country, to support building the political culture, civic culture. And for instance, I agree with Zsolt that this is important to have the basis as a 0 point education. And capacity building for all these institutions, including the political parties. It is not easy for election administration to work on behalf of citizens and work. Our major partners are CSOs, of course, civil society groups, and we refer to the recommendations provided by our international partners, but sometimes they do not really match to the interests of the political parties. And this is really not easy for election administration to make them understand that these recommendations are important for state, for general public, for citizens, and not only for one party or for one actor. So now in Georgia, this and what we can do as an EMB just to really offer the either discussion and format issue-based discussion, and also invite all of them to have some debate over the recommendations and issues, or even to have some kind of support in terms of providing expertise when it comes to the practical implementation, because otherwise we are not politicians. We cannot really decide instead of political parties. We just can give them some practical expertise, some real showcases, and to make them understand what is good and what is bad, and how we see future development. That's what we can do.
Да, спасибо. Спасибо, очень интересно.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. I see Nira wants to comment, please. Yes, in reality, this topic about the political parties and the citizens is a very interesting one. And I want to mention that Belarus is interesting in the following way, because during all of those years of their existing regime, the political parties essentially died out in Belarus. And this is another reason why we need to find another way. Yes, we need to develop political parties in time, but right now, the main engine for what can happen to the best in Belarus is the people. They are highly motivated, they need to be continue to be educated, and I'm glad that people watch this conference, and we need to continue discussing those issues. We need to explain how the elections can be held, how they should be held. And in this regard, I think that initially we need to give more hope to our people, to our citizens, and only after then we can develop political parties. Because right now, with all due respect to the parties that try to do something in Belarus, they are not a political force in Belarus. Thank you, Anira. I think we are already starting to getting closer to our goal, because we do not agree with each other, and this is beneficial to every discussion. We have two interesting questions, and I think we'll begin with the one that came at the latest, and it's the question about how to balance such two evaluation of elections is high turnout and the trust to the elections. The person who's asking this question is saying that so apparently the turnout was high in Belarus, but the low trust in elections. How can we work with those two criteria, both of which can express the quality of the elections? I want to refer to Mr. Margolin. You mentioned the importance of the trust to the people holding the elections. What is the more important in your opinion, and which role the high turnout plays in terms of evaluating the elections? In reality, both the turnout and the trust matter. It is not difficult to coordinate them. You just need to have basic respect while holding the elections, because when the authorities using so-called pandemics to limit the influence of observers on the election process, when forcing and scaring the committee members into falsifying the results and then evacuate them through windows of the polling places and transferring them to their homes with guards. There is no possible to have any kind of trust here, but the authorities used the preliminary elections to get the necessary turnout and the result, because the ballots during this election part is very easy to substitute, and on some polling places they had to admit that the turnout was 120–130% of the voters. I think that no representative of election committees can see in their worst nightmare, probably. But this is an example that the increased citizen activity as a turnout puts pressure on the election officials, and the practice that I've mentioned before, that the authorities will cancel the planned snap elections because the authorities cannot guarantee their results, even taking into consideration the existing pressure mechanisms. They cannot form the committees that will give the necessary result. Thank you very much. Yeah, in reality, it's a very interesting moment. I'm grateful for your opinion on the long-term perspective as the election developed in Belarus. You saw the elections with extremely low turnout in Belarus, and as you also observed the very high turnout elections during the last year. I think we have another question that will be the last for today before we summarize today. I don't know who'll be better to address it to, so listen to the question, and if you want to answer it, please show it. The question about the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression. So Mr. Kuzel asks for a comment about how important this aspect of election is, and how important is to take into consideration when introducing reforms. So does anyone have any commentary about the freedom of word, freedom of expression? I can say a couple of words. It's probably a topic that needs more than a couple of words, but right now this component changes because of the social networks. And even in Belarus, take into consideration the complete control of the TV, the people received and continue to receive alternative information from different sources, and those sources are not regulated by the officials. And this is a question for election experts, how and whether we should regulate the usage of the social networks during the election campaign. And in this issue, in terms of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, I stem from that we need to set the basic framework, so that not to over-regulate this issue, like regulate basic issues of political campaigning ads, the reputational policies. But I think that we need to leave as much freedom as possible, not to over-regulate this. Yes, thank you very much, Mira. Yes, Tamar?
Answer to Rasta Kuzel, this is excellent question, and it's not only election process. Freedom of expression is important in every sphere and in every processes. Of course, this is important in elections, but I agree with Nira that when it comes to the social networks, and there are some, falsified, not falsification, but let's say it is transferred to the disinformation and false information, and they also might be hate speech and obscene talk. So where is the line between this freedom of expression and this kind of problems, what we have seen, for instance, in many electoral processes? But I think should not regulate the freedom of expression. This is important, but we, at the same time, we need to fight against disinformation, against the obscene talk and the hate speech. And how? This is education. This is proactive communication. This is just to really change the system and build the trust. That's only solution.
Thank you very much, Tamar. And maybe, может быть, один комментарий.
Maybe one comment. When I was preparing for this event, I've looked at the history of the event that the Association of Electoral Bodies of Europe. I recalled that maybe in 2017 in Bulgaria, there was a topic of conscious voters during the digital age. So Jolt, we are touching these issues of social network, how important it is to take into consideration during the electoral reform. So should we just concentrate on the more broad general approaches?
Yes, at least we tried to speak about the conscious voter, because of course, some years ago, we all saw that now we have the internet. All the information is available like this. So we saw that it would be much easier for the voters to, let's say, to gather the most appropriate information before they are going into the ballot booths. But now it seems, of course, as you spoke about it, this is a new business. The whole disinformation, fake news, and so on and so on. So now this is absolutely a new situation that we can speak about a conscious voter, but as Tamar said, that we really need proactive communication, transparency, and of course education to, let's say, to build the conscious voters, and it should be started as early as possible. I don't want to say again that we have to start in the kindergarten, because I was warned that let's don't speak about the kids, but of course there are let's say some election could be as a game in the kindergarten as well. So we have to start to be a conscious citizen. It's not just about voting; it's about everything. So it is really important, and without this, even we never have a conscious voter. And I want to emphasize that maybe this is not a state duty. This is a duty of course, a common duty of the citizens, the different NGOs, and of course that the state also can step in. And as the electoral bodies are absolutely in touch with the people, this kind of project, what was also very highlighted as an absolutely good example of what we have in Moldova or in Georgia, and there they have an institution, they have project towards the voter education. So this kind of projects should be shown as a good example to other countries as well. Thank you.
Да, большое спасибо. Я думаю, что...
Yes, thank you very much. And I think that gives me an idea that we need to work with different parties, different colleagues, also with people who work in education, and to look at electoral reform, not only from the legal and technical point of view, but also in terms of reforms in other spheres of lives in a democratic country. I think it is time for us to summarize, to finish. I want to give everyone the opportunity to summarize their ideas, their impressions, and we can probably go backwards. So Zsolta, Tamar, Lev, and Inira, and then I will finish maybe 1 minute for each. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Alexander. I think just a few words. I think what I have to highlight, and said by the others as well, dialogue and transparency. This is my two key words. Without this, we are simply not moving forward. there is simply no way to react to each other. So these two simple words would be my final message. Thank you very much.
Maybe I will also join Jolt because, of course, reform process is important. Education is important. Proactive communication is important. Building of trust is important. But when it comes to the EMBs and the general electoral process, I see that transparency, this is our, let's say, support. This is what will, of course, survive EMB when they work. And also, we need to listen to the demand of the general public, and we need to make all the processes participatory to make sure that there is a consensus over the development of the country. That's my point.
I want to support in this regard Jolt, that really dialogue, and however hard it might, current situation might look when there is absolute rejection of laws, absolute lawlessness. How can we speak about the dialogue? But this is the only thing that can lead to the order in the country. If we don't have dialogue with Lukashenko, and probably we won't have dialogue with him, but with some authorities. But the dialogue is the only way to solve the issues peacefully, the issue of building a new country peacefully. I would probably say that for me it's very important interest from the Belarusian society to this topic, because in this way we'll make the reality of changes into the election in Belarus. But from pragmatic point of view, for me as a lawyer, I'm glad that we see concrete proposals, specific documents, that when the moment comes, for me it is very important to have something specific, tangible, that we can discuss in more detail. But those propositions should appear, and this conference is also about to have more propositions, more tangible texts that we can show to the people, that people can discuss between themselves, and experts can discuss, and after that we'll be able to use those tangible things. So yeah, thank you very much, Nira, Lev, Tamara, Jolt. It was a very interesting, at least for me, it was a very interesting discussion. And as with the previous expert panel, I'm sure that if any good discussion leaves more questions than it gives answers. And it shows that we need to continue our work. I had some things that I wanted to say as a result of this panel, but will have to just agree with all of you. I'm sure that the dialogue and between the society too, with our colleagues and partners and friends who want the best for the country, it will be the basis for the success of democratic transformation of the country. And in this panel discussion or other discussions, I didn't have for a moment expression that the foreign colleagues just came to give instructions how to live, how to hold elections. I think we managed to organize a discussion in the previous ones, that we are sharing ideas as equals. We share our ideas and our colleagues give their ideas, and this is the basis for cooperation, open and honest. Maybe we don't have answers to all the questions, but also colleagues from abroad share not only the stories of success, they also give the information about the issues that they faced in the past, and they are doing this so that we can avoid these mistakes of the past. And I think in this regard, we probably held this whole conference, and I will be closing this expert panel discussion, and I will closing the whole today conference. I will be closing it with two statements. First, I want to underline once again, stress once again that we officially and consciously and honestly we invited the representative of the current authorities of Belarus to participate in this conference, and we really wanted for this to happen, specifically because we believe in the necessity of the dialogue and the discussion to solve the crisis in Belarus. Nobody wants this crisis. Everyone is tired of it. Everyone to resolve this crisis, and it can be done democratically, peacefully, through dialogue, through talks, through new elections. And
my second point is that many would perceive this, and we received the relevant feedback. We had a lot of commentaries about this. That's great that we are being watched. Many say, many ask, why you discuss it now? I'm repeating it once again. We need to discuss scenarios. We need to discuss possibilities, plans, short-term and long-term, beforehand, in order to avoid mistakes when we don't have enough time, considering the political context and everything. We need to be ready for everything technically and to approach everything with a cool head. And for that, we need to think the problems over beforehand. We need to find solutions to our problems altogether. And my last point is that I'm confident that by closing this conference, I can say that we'll be continuing such meetings. They may be more technical, more expert-based, in a more narrow circle, but they will always be transparent and open. I would like to thank all our partners, co-organizers like IFSGRI, International IDEA, as well as people who are behind the screens and doing everything possible for this to be technically smooth. And it has been smooth for the last 2 days. Svetlana Georgievna Tikhanovskaya is saying hello to everyone and gratitude for the fact that this conference took place. My last point is that the recordings of all the sessions in 3 languages will be available on YouTube. And I think this will once again confirm the fact that we are working transparently and openly and in the name of the dialogue, both inside Belarus and with our foreign colleagues and friends. Thank you very much, everyone. Here I close the conference. Thank you.